So let's suppose you want to write a really cool science fiction story. Let's say you want to join the next generation of science fiction authors. Well, what do you need to write a science fiction story? I'm going to attempt to explain that in as little time as possible here in this video. The first thing you're going to need is a basic premise. This is the foundation of a science fiction story, and it's what separates science fiction from other genres like horror. With science fiction, effectively what your story should do, this is what the most effective science fiction stories do, is set up a situation that could never possibly happen in real life, and hypothesize about what would go down, how the sequence of events would take place, how people would respond to the scenario. Like, for instance, Babel 2 by Damon Knight is about a world in which everyone speaks a completely different language, so nobody can understand each other. That's an incredibly compelling concept. Once it goes into action, then we observe how the world responds to the conflict. But the premise is different from the conflict. The premise is just what happens to the world that makes it different from our world. As I've pointed out previously in other videos, science fiction does not necessarily need to be too far divorced from our own reality. It can be a couple steps removed, but it doesn't need to go full-on outer space adventure. You can have a relatively grounded science fiction story set here in present day on Earth, if you want to. All that matters is that you have an interesting premise about something slightly changing in the character's immediate environment. The premise is going to take precedence over the characters. Science fiction isn't really a character-driven genre. It can be. There are very memorable characters produced from science fiction, but the best science fiction, especially hard science fiction, although soft science fiction can be too, the best science fiction is always premise-driven, first and foremost. It takes essential fundamental laws of physics or biology or chemistry and violates them through the creative process. It says, you didn't think we can travel through space? Well, here, we're traveling through space. We're using the power of our imaginations to conceive of something, and we're saying it's happening now, so here's how it would go down if that were to happen. If this hypothetical scenario were to play out in real time, this is how things would play out. Okay, so once you've got your premise nailed down, the next thing that you're going to want to tackle is the feel of your science fiction story. And by this I mean, is your science fiction story really cynical and pessimistic, like a J.G. Ballard novel? Or is it more optimistic and hopeful, like an Asimov novel? What stylistic cues do you take from various decades? Like, for instance, if you're going for a 60s Jetsons space age type feel, and you want a lot of moon boots and turbo lasers and shit, you know, real cool stuff like that. Whereas, if you're going for a 70s type flair, then you want to make your science fiction feel like Invasion of the Bee-Girls or Empire of the Ants with Joan Collins or Death Race 2000. I personally am into a science fiction future where everything is made out of neon and people still listen to new wave music. Now that's an interesting hypothetical scenario. Anyway, if you're a competent science fiction writer, you won't just replicate the styles and sensibilities of various eras or points in time. You will combine these traits, you'll mix them together. Your science fiction world might have elements of the Jetsons and elements of Mad Max, if that's at all possible. It's also going to have a little bit of you in there. You're going to sprinkle a little bit of your own personal experience and ideas into your story, so that it reflects who you are as a person. It reflects your outlook on life. For instance, whenever I read a Harlan Ellison story, I feel Harlan Ellison's energy in it. I feel that Harlan Ellison is reaching through the page and talking to me and saying, here's an interesting idea, but I hate the world and everyone in it. And that's really interesting. He channels himself into his art. That's a pretty advanced technique, and it takes some finesse to pull off. But if you can effectively put yourself into your stories, then people will be able to recognize which stories are yours and which are someone else's. That's why people found out that Richard Bachman was just Stephen King, because Stephen King writes like Stephen King, and no one else writes like Stephen King. It just doesn't happen. One resource that can be really useful if you want to establish your tone is read and watch as much material from the era you're going for as possible to get a good idea of how people in that time talk, dress, look, etc. Whatever imaginary future or present or hypothetical past or alternate present that a science fiction story conveys, really get a knack for it. Like, for instance, if I'm trying to write a 1950s space age type story about an alien invasion from Mars, then I'll pick up a copy of Weird Science published by EC Comics. I just figured I should plug Weird Science somewhere in this video because it's a fucking awesome comic line and more people should read it. Alright, once you've got your premise and your tone established, what you're going to want to do is figure out how long your thing is going to be. Is it going to be a short story, or is it going to be a novel, or is it going to be a novella? That depends first and foremost on how long you think you can stretch your premise out for. If your premise is relatively simple, like Babel 2, then you can have your main character solve it in a number of pages, 20 or so. That's about 5,000, 4,000 words. On the other hand, if your premise is really interesting, like Flowers for Algernon or something, then you're going to want to stretch that sucker out to 70,000, 80,000 words, and really milk it for all it's worth. Introduce characters, introduce a whole world with lots of different people and shit, and go for it. Do not let a good idea just be a short story if it could be a novel. If it has novel potential, milk it for all it's worth. Sit down, write 1,000 words a day, and in just a couple months, you'll have an entire novel ready to go. The most important thing to keep in mind is that a novel has to be paced way more tightly and consciously than a short story. With a short story, that's just a quick little one-off, a little experiment that you're going for. But if you're writing a novel, you need to have a well-planned out beginning and middle and end and climax and all of that. Although, if you want to be really experimental, you can drag out sections or chop sections or put certain sections where they don't go. But whatever. Just so long as there's an underlying sense of satisfaction that the reader gets once they've closed the book and they're like, yeah, this was worth my time. I'm glad I read through this entire thing, especially that last part. That was really worth holding out for throughout the entire rest of the book. So there you have it. I think those are the three really fundamental and essential elements of science fiction writing. They're parts of writing that apply to all genres, including science fiction, like character and all of that. But I think those are the most important three specifically for science fiction: premise, tone, and pacing. And if you have those three nailed down, then you can cook up some really interesting, mind-bending stuff that'll expand your perspective and open up broad new horizons of self-expression for you. Thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful in some sort of way. I've been Nick Cicada. If you have any questions about techniques, recommendations for future videos, leave them down in the comments. And until next time, sporsh and keep writing.